welcome to the Think Global Forum Roundtable. This is part 2 of a 3-part series where we're discussing AI, content, localization, and everything in between. Today, I'm delighted to be joined by the CIO, Chief Information Officer of XTM, Andy. You're very welcome, Andy, to today's proceedings. And of course, Bruno Herrmann. People will know Bruno from part 1, where we were discussing this fascinating topic. And again, great to be joined by Tom Doerr. Tom, thanks very much for joining us here today. Maria and I will help proceedings along with the Think Global Forum Roundtable. We've got 2 exciting topics for you. Andy's going to kick us off with a little discussion about LLMs and the future of translation technology, something that we're all very much interested in. Andy, I know, has something that he's going to show us in terms of a video, and then he's going to maybe summarize some of that and give us a little bit of insight into what he's been working on over the last year or so. And then Bruno is also going to talk something that's very important, which is leveraging language data to capitalize on content assets. And there's some interesting thought-provoking questions I'm sure Bruno will put forward. And then Tom, I, Maria, and of course Bruno and Andy will have a panel discussion on these very topics, and we'll try and invite you in for some Q&A at the end where we can answer some audience questions. So please, if you're watching us here live today, make sure that you put in the questions into the Q&A panel that you'll find very much at the bottom of your screen. So let's get started. Andy, I'm going to hand over to you, sir. So maybe if you want to kick us off today.
Okay, many thanks, Simon. And thank you to everyone who's actually logged in to see the webinar. I have been involved with AI and IT for more than 10 years now. I've spent about 48 years in IT in general. Rather than you listening to an old, bald guy, I've actually decided for the presentation to make myself redundant and use AI to present. So Daniela, can we cue Lisa?
Hi, my name is Lisa. I am XTM's AI avatar. I am going to present how we are planning to implement AI technology in XTM. As you are by now aware, there is big change coming to computing in the AI space. It has the potential to have a dramatic effect on the direction of technology, such that we have not seen in over 3 decades. Based on the availability of enormous volumes of data available on the internet over the past 20 years, as well as digitized books, large language models based on the latest AI algorithms are producing incredible results in terms of text generation. This not only covers basic question and answer queries, but also translation and natural language processing. We are at the start of the journey with large language models, with many more improvements in terms of quality and performance to come. This will have a significant impact on our industry, potentially replacing human translation in most instances. XTM already does more than our competitors in the field of AI, NLP. Our interlanguage vector space, ILVS, and multifaceted translation analysis, MFTA, technologies are revolutionary and based on fundamental research by Google and Facebook AI teams. ILVS and MFTA enable real productivity gains for translators and reviewers. Additional AI NLP techniques based on ILVS and MFTA enable much more accurate and efficient fuzzy matching and terminology generation and identification. In the near future, we will be adding new AI NLP features from OpenAI. By now, we would have all heard of OpenAI along with the GPT-3, ChatGPT, and GPT-4 systems. Valued at over $27 billion, OpenAI has only been in existence for 8 years. Founded by, among others, Elon Musk, OpenAI's GPT-3 AI model has produced astounding results based on detailed AI analysis of terabytes of data harvested mainly from the internet. ChatGPT, based on an improved version of the GPT-3 model, was launched to universal acclaim in November 2022. GPT-4 was launched in March 2023 with larger parameters and further AI algorithm improvements. The pace of development is breathtaking. OpenAI is not the only game in town, with many other models being created by Google, Facebook, etc., but it is the most open and commercially accessible. Large language models will have an increasing influence on AI and NLP, specifically in the field of natural language processing and translation. You can think of them as the Swiss Army knife of AI, NLP, tackling translation and natural language processing functions such as grammar and spell checking, named entity recognition, etc. The scope of languages covered is amazing, more than 150 languages. Although GPT-4 and other large language models have currently some rough edges, we are betting on the experience to date, which indicates a constantly improving direction by the time that we come to implementation later this year. The pace of change is astounding, with newer and better models appearing almost weekly. Meta with Llama and Google with Palm 2, Gemini and Bard playing catch-up. Anthropic with Claude 2 also shows great promise. Nevertheless, OpenAI is still streets ahead with offering an easily accessible, commercially viable solution. Do not rule out Google though. Nearly all large language models are fundamentally based on work done by Google, and I have not mentioned Google's DeepMind team, which is doing incredible work on general artificial intelligence. 2024 is shaping up to be an incredible year for AI, with the promise of GPT-5 and more. If you wonder how we could use GPT in XTM, there are lots of potential areas. The main implementations will be in machine translation, offering human-level translation quality, as well as the ability to do fuzzy completion, grammar checking for 150-plus languages, proper anonymization, summarization, automatic gender conversion, translation voice and tone adaptation, checking the quality of translation, etc. LLM systems, such as GPT-4, as mentioned previously, are like a Swiss Army knife for AI and NLP processing, and there are potentially many areas of XTM that could benefit. We are at the start of this exciting journey, and 2024 will see us phasing in these exciting new features in XTM. I am Lisa, XTM's AI avatar. Thank you for your time and attention.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. I think Lisa said it all. The thing to actually grasp in your mind fundamentally is we are just at the beginning of the journey. This is an incredible breakthrough in terms of artificial intelligence. So large language models have been a phenomenal advancement in computing in general. We were not aware fundamentally of some of the hidden chains, the hidden actual relationships between words across different sentences and paragraphs that have become evident from large language models. When I started working on OpenAI's GPT-3 system at the beginning of September last year, this is way before launch of ChatGPT, my bottom jaw dropped. I was just blown away by the fluency, the accuracy of the translation. And that's the thing to bear in mind. It is difficult to describe how much of a game changer this is. Bill Gates, bless him, said that it was only the second time in his career that he'd been completely blown away. The first time was when he saw the mouse Windows interface. And the second time was when he had a demonstration of OpenAI's GPT-3 system. In our discussions, I'll go through a lot more, but the main message is we are only at the beginning of the journey. There are phenomenal developments almost happening weekly that are removing any potential barriers that we come across. They are quickly addressed and removed as and when they come to the attention of the researchers. So that's it from me. Over to Bruno.
Well, thanks, Andy. It's been really, really good to hear from you on that. And also, of course, from AI. I mean, what an interesting start to a round table where the humans take a back seat and the AI takes over. possibly the way of things to come. But Bruno, let's dive straight into your topic.
Thank you, and thanks, Andy. Great points. I will make the connection with what you said quite a number of times during my presentation. So, and I'm quite jealous about your AI avatar. So I need to start considering building one for me. I would start probably by saying that, you know, language data is for AI what blood is for human beings, which is, it's vital. So there is no AI without data. The question is, what data? Of course, when we talk about multilingual AI, we need language data. We need data in multiple languages. But of course, you know, having said that, that's just the beginning of the journey. So Andy shared a lot of great data and great insights about AI and, you know, the different models. I'm going to move a little bit more than a little bit. I'm going to move really upstream now and talk about what needs to be done to get there, to build LLMs, to build multilingual AI. So just for today, just to keep it rather short and interesting, I decided actually to cover 5 points and actually to tell a little bit of my experience. So it's not just me saying something, it's just based on my work with different clients over the past, let's say, 12 months or 18 months now. And the first point, which is the title of the slide, which is making it value-driven and inclusive. Language data is the way to make AI value-driven and inclusive. I will tell a bit more about what it is in a minute, but essentially, there are, when you talk about language data, we should be aware that there will be a huge impact on people, on processes, and on technology, in that order, probably. So the localization industry, and then more broadly, the content industry, is already being impacted by AI. But I think, as Andy said, the magnitude and, you know, the magnitude of the change, but also the fact that we are just in the beginning of the journey, makes language data really crucial for what's going to happen next. So I'm going to talk about this impact at different levels. And also the last point, which might be a bit surprising to some of you, which is just based on my experience, but not in the past 18 months, in the past 10 years, because I was lucky enough to work for a big data science company in the past, and we were already using language data before AI was hype and before AI was in everybody's mind. The difference between the use of language data 10 years ago and today, 10 years ago, it was used for what is still called business intelligence, BI. Now it's used for AI. So as soon as you have AI intelligence in what you need to do, you need data. But I will explain that, you know, language data can create value beyond generative AI or beyond content creation, which is probably, even more exciting for people working in this area. So if we can move to the next slide. First, I would like to, probably anticipate a question from many people. Why do we need to talk about language data? Why? Well, the simple answer, or the short answer is because it's going to matter for customers. It's going to impact customers at the end of the day. When we talk about language data, we have to do it for AI, of course, to make sure that we build AI in a reliable and accurate way. But we also need to make sure that we use language data and that we manage language data for the end goal, the end objective, which is, customers. It's actually the experience that customers are going to get. So I just put here 4 reasons or 4 factors, I could say, in terms of technology, where language data comes to play. The first one, which is the creation, the capture, and the conversion tools for language data. As I will say in a minute, language data doesn't come out of the blue. There is an action. There are several actions actually to take to convert content assets into language data. And it's quite funny because a few months ago, I was talking to an executive from a big e-commerce company. And he said to me, I'm so excited because we have thousands of files, video files and audio files, which have been recorded during the interaction between our customer service and clients. And I said, well, great. So what are you going to do to convert those files? And he looked at me in a very strange way and he said, what do you mean, Bruno? But we have the files, so it's good enough to start feeding and training the AI. And I said, I don't think you will manage to train any AI engine with PowerPoint and Word files. You need data to do that. So there is a conversion process, which is something that in some organizations is underestimated, or even worse, it's overlooked, because of course, everybody's so focused on AI, on delivering the multilingual AI, that some people tend to forget that there are quite a number of actions, changes to implement before getting there. So that's where technology comes to play with language data. Another area is, of course, the training itself, how AI is going to be trained, with technology first, and then, operations can calibrate the way they work in terms of, assignment of post-editing. Integration of data and content services. That's something I will touch on in the next slide. So I'm going to talk too much about this one now. And the last one, which is AI training with language data for marketing and experience effectiveness. This is, related to what I said before, which is that language data creates value beyond what everybody has been talking about so far, which is generative AI or AI in general. It's going to help a number of functions, a number of processes to be, accelerated and to be improved. And for that part, I mentioned the difference between storytelling and story selling. So of course, marketing people will be able to use language data to create content, which is what they've been doing for decades now, to tell stories, to tell nice stories. But what customers are expecting are stories that are selling something that they can relate to, that they can sort of trigger some reaction about. So that is where there is also a connection between language data in technology, the impact on operations, and of course the final delivery in terms of customer experience. Having said that, we can move to the next slide, where I just wanted to use a picture that I use on a regular basis to give an example of what I call a content operations ecosystem. An ecosystem doesn't have to be big. It can be small. It can be made of a CMS and a TMS and a CAT tool, for instance. I just put here an example. So it's not a model that you see on your screen. It's a model of content operations ecosystem. The one thing that is becoming more and more important are the boxes at the bottom of this picture, which are content and data services. Why? Again, well, it is actually to start the conversion process of content assets. Some assets are in text format. Okay, great. It's already, quite usable. But a number of assets are not in text format. They are in audio and video. So you need to start converting those files from the format they are in, which might be an MP4, which might be WMV, whatever. But these files, and sometimes these files have not been translated before, because as I said, in customer service, they've been recorded by customer service teams, and sometimes they referred to it, but most of the time those files were just untapped, which is a shame. But now with language data, these files can finally create some value. And another service, which is data annotation. I put this one, I could have put on other ones, but it's because I realize now that for the localization industry and for the language industry as a whole, there is a tremendous opportunity in terms of data annotation. It sounds a little bit like simple and straightforward, but annotation is key in the process of converting assets into data. Because if annotation is not done right, it's not done in an accurate way, of course, the language data itself is not going to be accurate and relevant. So, and interestingly, I just checked last week on LinkedIn, in the job section, I typed data annotation, and I found quite a number of jobs not just in the localization industry, in other industries as well, where data annotation was becoming really important in terms of job offering. So actually, it can be also an opportunity for language people or people in the language industry to start doing something different. If people are just getting bored with post-editing, they might say, okay, there is an opportunity for me as a linguist or as a person with language skills to do something different. So content and data services are going to become a really important part of any content ops system. And right now, I'm recommending already to some of my clients to start making that move. And of course, keeping their ecosystem maybe as it is today, but start really, inserting, deploying, I would say, tools that can really be useful for the conversion from files into data. And of course, the purpose of the ecosystem is always the same, is to create a synergy between machine and human intelligence and make sure that everybody is connected in the supply chain, including now the people who are going to be in charge of language data management. We can go to the next slide. Thanks, Maria. And then, of course, the first impact, as I said, is going to be, well, the second impact after the people, is going to be on content operations. I call it reshaping content operations because it's a major change. It's probably one of the most important changes I've seen in this industry for the past 10 years after post-editing. In many cases, for decades, organizations have been managing their content on a workflow, with a workflow or in a supply chain that is file-based. So I mentioned here a typical, maybe a bit simple, but it's just to make my point, a typical workflow, a typical supply chain, from content creation to delivery, but everything was based on file transaction. Clients were sending files to LSPs, LSPs were localizing the files, they were sending the files back to the clients. So and project managers were sending files sometimes to other functions. So the thing, it was very, very file-based, very file transaction-based. And that was fine because, of course, everything was based most of the time on files in different formats. Although, of course, the content needed to be extracted to be, of course, available in a CAD tool to be post-edited. But the actual essence or the baseline was files. With AI, with language data, there is a big change in the game of content supply chains, which is that the supply chain are going to be more than ever AI powered. And again, here I put a simple and just to keep it understandable, some sort of very standardized supply chain where language data with content and data services is going to be crucial. And you see that the first part of the supply chain, if you compare it with the file-based supply chain, is quite different. Because in that case, the conversion process has to be managed properly. There are different tasks, and I will give some examples in the rest of the presentation. But if you look at the first steps, it's about capturing the content, converting it, curating, tagging. And I could have put more, but just to see that this part of the supply chain is changed dramatically. The second part might be more comparable with the file-based content supply chain, but I think the point here is, for the moment, at least for now, in this year and probably in 2024, will be that those two workflows will live together, because many organizations are transitioning now from one type of supply chain to another one. So the question is not which one, is it the one or the other? My answer is it's the one and the other for the moment. Of course, once I would say organizations will be fully transitioned to AI-powered supply chains, then obviously it's going to be probably a bit outdated to keep file-based content supply chains, because most of content will be created as language data. But that's, of course, something that will take some time. And as Andy said, it's the beginning of the journey today. So this will be becoming implemented gradually But for the moment, it's really important to consider those two supply chains to cover in operations, to cover all content requirements, and not to drop one to actually deliver another one. I think you can go to the next slide. When I said that there is an impact on people in the localization industry, that was in a very positive way, because I know some people are afraid or they are skeptical about what AI is going to be, what's going to be for them, what AI is going to have in store for them. Of course, every change creates fears, sometimes, overreaction. What I mean here is that, there will be, and there are already now, but there will be even more in the coming years, new roles and responsibilities for people in the language industry, because language data cannot be just managed by data scientists. Personally, I worked 15 years in a company together with data scientists, and I can tell from my own experience that data scientists, they have their own experience, which is data management, but linguists or people in the language industry, they have their own experience, which is the language experience. So it's not, again, it's not the one or the other, it's the one and the other. Data scientists and linguists, or language people, as I call them in a very generic way, should work together. But for linguists, if we talk about linguists and even project managers in the language industry, there are quite a number of new roles and responsibilities that are coming, because of the change in terms of, language data creation. I just mentioned a few examples here, so I didn't want to be too detailed or too text intensive. But the point is that all these roles, all these jobs require language experience. You cannot just say, yeah, I'm going to give one of these roles to a multilingual or a bilingual, let's say, not multilingual, a bilingual data scientist. I have a lot of respect for data scientists because, as I said, I worked many years with them. But of course, most of them recognize that they don't have the experience, they don't have the expertise to actually, manage language data in a very reliable way, and that's fine. I think everybody has its own expertise, but here, these roles, which I mentioned here, are really new opportunities, new, I would say, new challenges for people who like challenges in the industry. But okay, it's something that I certainly, like to promote. If we go to the next slide, and in line with the new roles and responsibilities, of course, there are some new activities and tasks. So this is another piece of good news for the language industry, for the localization industry, is that since content will have to be language data, and there is a whole conversion, a whole transformation that needs to be happening, then of course, there are some new activities which require, again, language experience, language expertise, to make sure that essentially everyone in the chain, again, in the content supply chain, that everyone can really contribute and can, at the end of the day, the goal is to have clean, reliable, and usable language data. As I said, it's like blood for human beings. If data is not clean, is not reliable, is not relevant, AI will be criticized for not being relevant, detailed, accurate. So there is, there is no miracle, I would say. The language industry has already grasped that, I know, but I think that what needs to be really understood now is that these new activities and these new tasks should be really part of any, I would say, strategy, any localization strategy upfront, not next year, not in 2 years from now. It's not an option. It's not an afterthought. It has to be really considered from day one, so that localization teams can also be more engaged. They can be more embedded in this new way of working, or this new way of working, at least in some new activities that are required by the management of language data. I like, for instance, here to call out a few examples. Content extraction is very important. Language data annotation, and there are even some companies that are now developing their business just based on that. It's become a vertical business. And also knowledge data management. Of course, knowledge management is not new. Knowledge management has been in many organizations for decades. But the change now is that the knowledge is going to be data. It's no longer to be just 100 files stored somewhere on the intranet or stored somewhere in the network. Knowledge is going to be data. So knowledge data management is going to be impacted. And obviously, again, since it's multilingual, people in the language industry will have an opportunity to develop, first of all, to leverage their skills, but also to develop some new skills in, knowledge management. In the past, they were not doing it because knowledge management was traditionally more, I would say, owned by marketing or communications team or training and learning development teams. But now with the big change generated by the language data needs, then of course it's going to become very, very appropriate, very relevant for language people or language localization people. So again, this gives it's just a preview. What I'm showing here is just an example of what is already now very, I would say, exciting for the localization industry. There will be more because, of course, the task is huge. AI is there to stay, so it's not going to be just something for this year and the next year. And the journey is going to take some time, most of all in some industries where probably this type of change is even more complicated, like regulated industries, like life science, finance, where language models have to be custom. Large language models can be used by some industries, but of course, when it comes to the life science industry, which is one of my favorite industries, you cannot just use large language models as such. In many cases, you need to develop. Certainly, the big pharma player, the big biotech players, they will want at some point to develop their own custom models, language models, just to make sure that this language model is reflecting their terminology, their way of creating content. So there are a number of opportunities that are just ahead. We can go to the next slide. Something that I like to say as well, it's actually that language data is going to be creating value more than just for multilingual AI or generative AI. What I mean here is that there are a number of uses which in some industries have already been addressed, but it's something that is going to be probably a huge opportunity again for the localization industry, or at least the language industry, to focus on, which is my example here is about enhancing customer experiences. A customer is more than a customer. We know that. A customer is not just somebody who is buying something. A customer starts by being someone who is looking for information. It's going to be somebody searching for information. It's going to be somebody struggling to find information, comparing information, asking questions to, about products or services. It's going to be somebody sharing information, and then finally making a decision before completing the purchase. What I mean here is that it's like those Russian dolls. Every time you see a customer, it's actually, there are many customers inside, with people who are not customers yet, but are soon to be customers. And actually, language data will definitely play a big role in improving how content is going to address those micro experiences. So, by targeting, for instance, customers asking questions or customers, searching for information, language data can become a real great tool for a number of people. And maybe those people don't know that yet, but they will find out, to actually say, yes, we can use language data to improve the vocabulary, to improve the terminology, to improve the fluency, to improve the cultural sensitivity of the content. And these people, as I said here, can be people who might be, quite surprised about this for themselves, that brand managers, UX writers are going to be great advocates, or they're already, in some cases, they're already great advocates of language data, content designers, application developers. So there are a number of people in the organization outside localization and outside data science. These people are going to benefit from any investment in language data, which is another reason for building language data management in any localization strategy, and I would even say in any content strategy, because that's an example where the value can be created, and it's also an example of where language data can make AI really inclusive by engaging all people across functions and across roles in an organization or in a company. And for me, that's it for today. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Bruno. A lot of food for thought in that presentation. I don't know how you managed to fit all that into a short space of time. So we've heard from Andy and AI today on, the future of translation tech and LLMs. And Bruno, I think it was good as well that you kind of went upstream a bit, if I can use that term, talking as well about data and the importance of that, and maybe some of the more optimistic views on the roles that will create, and also the impacts, I suppose, to the content supply chains, ultimately with these AI-powered supply chains. I want to bring Tom in. Tom, you've been listening intently. Obviously, AI is a big part of your business. Any initial thoughts or observations on what we're discussing here today?
Yeah, and there was lots of great stuff in there, and I was my ears were pricking up time and time again when you mentioned certain things there, Bruno, and with yours, Andy, well, the AI that you used. My background is in marketing, and I help businesses adopt AI for marketing. So a lot of what we talk about, a lot of what we do is around the generative stuff. And it's only when you talk to businesses that have a bit more of a deeper understanding of this, or perhaps much larger, that we start really exploring the potential of LLMs. And Bruno's presentation in there had a couple of references to the effectiveness of content. That's always something, your effectiveness is crucial, and your understanding of it is crucial when it comes to marketing. And you often, you rely on a relatively small data set or just your understanding of a bunch of numbers and tables and graphs when it comes to what your content and what your marketing efforts are doing in general. The development, the advancements of these LLMs and what is available in the market and what some companies are building makes me really excited about how we're going to be able to understand the effectiveness of the work that's been done, especially the content. Talking today about translation and localization as well. And one thing that's often overlooked is the nuances around between how things have performed and been effective across, in different languages, across different regions, in different areas, at a hyper-local and more personalized level. The LLMs that are being built and with things like ChatGPT Enterprise that companies will be able to use and fine-tune with their own data to help them understand what's performed for them in the past, what of their and truly understand their customers from their perspective. I mean, if we were to imagine them loading in decades worth of data across their websites and their CRMs and their social media tools, their product reviews, any access to performance data like that they may have, and advertising metrics, you could imagine they would start to discover things they never would have imagined, they never would have considered before, around how things have performed and the sentiment that they're seeing back from their customers, the kind of cultural nuances that are only really recognized when you go down to a more hyper-local level. And that's great to learn, but then you put it back upstream and you take it to the strategic level. It opens up a whole new world of possibilities for marketers, to consider how they can strategically address their customers' needs, and the different markets that they operate in, to deliver better, more effective marketing and content based on you know, these models that are going to be trained on their own data. And I mean, we're barely scratching the surface. I know we've all mentioned how new all of this stuff is, and everyone's familiarity with AI is fairly in its youthful stages. But in terms of what this means for marketing, I mean, you know, there's almost nothing out there that can really demonstrate what's available now. And fast forward a week, a month, a quarter, or a year, it's going to be inconceivable what we'll be able to do with these models just based on our own data. And I'm, you know, I have a huge amount of excitement, but I certainly don't pretend to know as much as these guys on this technical stuff. I definitely lean more on the generative, the outcome and output side of things, because to me and to marketing, you know, this stuff is so new. So that's my rambling way of saying I'm just very, very excited about where we're going with this.
Yeah, and I think Andy echoed that at the start, didn't he? That we often hear that the phrase that, you know, we're only scratching the surface, we're at the beginning of this journey. And Andy, one of the things that you were talking about was GPT-5 and whatever comes after that. And we're still trying to figure out 3.5 turbo, GPT-4 plugins. You know, we're all working with the data, I suppose, that these LLMs by these big technology companies have been trained on, which brings me on to a nice question around data. Back to what Bruno was saying, because whether it's marketing data or customer service data, or whether it's corporate data, we are seeing large organizations that have the funding, the budget, and the wherewithal to train their own models starting to build out much more in this area. But in the localization industry, it seems like we have made a little bit of progress, but there's a long way to go, particularly when you think of multilingual data and when you think of all of the challenges, whether that's bias, whether it's incorrect data in the first place, or whether it's just some of this large LLM training that isn't really bespoke enough for the work of, say, a large LSP or a large client looking to grow their international business. So I want to maybe kick that open as a topic for the panel here today. So does anybody want to start the discussion around the training of data? Andy?
Okay, many thanks, Simon, and many thanks, Tom and Bruno. Very, very interesting presentations. Very, very interesting topics that you've raised. I've just spent the last 3 months building an LLM, so I have some experience behind this. So what did I do? I created a knowledge base of everything in XTM. So I took all of our confluence, the kind of how do you, everything that we had for both our support teams, our dev teams, our customer support people as well, and included into the mix absolutely everything else. So all our SLA, all our commercial agreements, absolutely everything, tipped everything in, and created a LLM effectively using embeddings, which is a technique that's recommended by OpenAI and quite a few other companies. The challenges that I found weren't with the actual capabilities of, we were using, still are using GPT 3.5 Turbo for this. The challenges were to stop it hallucinating in this instance. So it would come up, because it wants to please, right? It's a text generation system. It sometimes comes up, if someone asks a question in a not precise enough way, it will invent based on the data. So a lot of the work I've spent over the last month is trying to stop it hallucinating and, you know, make it actually report accurately from the data. And a lot of this was to do with tuning the prompts. So this may sound funny, But I had to resort to prompts like, if you make a mistake and you do not report something accurately, you will be dismissed. It sounds comical, it does help actually, or it will be fatal to you if you actually report, so if you create an answer that isn't supported by the given context. So quite a bit of this is quite funny.
You're getting quite strict with your model there, Andy, yeah?
Exactly. Because the whole goal is to provide accurate answers. And on the whole, it's extremely good. It comes up with things that are so fluent. And, if you ask the same question twice, it'll reply slightly differently. So it's not just a stochastic parrot. It is actually formulating a slightly different form of words, which is really great. But to cut long story short, it's relatively easy to build an LLM. Surprise, surprise. It's not difficult with the tools that are provided. The accuracy of the fluency of the translation is astounding. Intento, who provides a system that's Intento, based out of California, they will assess your data and actually route it to the best MT engine that they have made judgments of. So they've been through all of the MT engines and they know their strengths and weaknesses, and depending on your data, they will actually route it to one engine or the other engine. They produce a quarterly report on the state of MT. That obviously includes NMT. The current crop of LLM engines are coming out at the top, amongst the top 5, which is quite incredible, seeing that the system has only really been tested to any extent for, since the last 12 months or so from this point of view. The other astounding thing about the LLMs is the way in which you can tell it, okay, translate this for a teenage audience, or translate this for a professional medical audience, or translate this in the female voice, for the appropriate audience where the target language is gender influence, or uses gender a lot, like my own native language Polish. So it is just incredible. And it's like Tom said, getting it to generate text for marketing, or from my point of view, in localization, we have this thing where we're translating marketing material where give me a couple of alternatives. So the in-country reviewers can choose out of a number of alternatives, because what you say in English doesn't necessarily translate directly into what would work in Polish or German. So its ability to produce multiple alternatives on the same theme, again, this is astounding. Give me 4 or 5 translations for this sentence based on these parameters. Phenomenal. The problem we have at the moment in localization is a practical one, is billing. All of the LLM models which I've encountered have the most bizarre billing methodology imaginable. Billing is based on so-called tokens, but tokens aren't words. Tokens are frequent words in English, or frequent trigrams, ing or ed, etc., ed, that occur often in English. When you move away from English as a source language, the further away you move from it, the more expensive it becomes, and every character becomes a token. So French is the closest language to English. Don't care what people say. English is a Romance language masquerading as a Germanic one. 60% of our vocabulary is Romance. French, you give anybody an English speaker doesn't know any other language, a piece of French text, he'll be able to more or less work out what it's about. Give him Dutch, German, Scandinavian, any of the Scandinavian languages or any of the Slavic languages, no idea at all. But these LLMs, specifically OpenAI, AI, and Anthropic, they also charge you on the target tokens. So if you're going away from the Latin alphabet, it's absolutely bizarre. Again, absolutely every single token is every single character is a token. So Greek, Hebrew, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, you name it. As soon as you've moved away from the Latin alphabet, it gets worse. But even if you move away from French, it becomes quite expensive. And the disparity between languages is quite immense. So if you're translating from English into French, and then you translate the same thing into Russian, it's going to be about 5 times more expensive. So, it's early days yet, as far as that's concerned. The other thing is the stability of the systems. When OpenAI released ChatGPT, performance nosedived, crashed, absolutely. Now they have the enterprise offering, which is expensive. You have to have a minimum of 150 language licenses. Sorry, you're talking about big bucks here. Even for an LSP, for a large LSP, it's still very, very expensive. So there are issues over performance, over the actual charging for the languages, and don't even contemplate running your own large language model for translation. Number of servers, and even if you did put them together, the number of dev ops people you'd have to employ is just out of this world. By the way, OpenAI are still burning through $700,000 a day. So the business model needs to be assessed. I think OpenAI are going to be okay, but it's still a very, very expensive business to be in at the moment. Okay, that's me.
Thanks, Andy. It's interesting. I saw one at the time of recording this. Obviously, one of the headlines is about an 80 billion valuation, or worse to that effect. And it's interesting when you look at the cash burn, and it's the sheer amount of compute power required and technical expertise required to deliver this stuff. But I did like the comment you made about one of the big struggles is I'm still trying to stop it from hallucinating, even though I've given all my data. And I think that's a common thing for anybody who's gone down that route. And Phil Ritchie was on part 1 of our series, the CTO of Vistatech.
Yep.
And he was saying, the biggest frustration is, to paraphrase, was kind of depending on what time of day you ask the same prompt, it will give you a completely different response. So the consistency is a big factor here,
Yes. But one thing I must say, in terms of translation, the accuracy tends to be really, really good.
Yeah.
That I can attest to. I'm just totally blown away. But other things like bilingual terminology extraction, it will identify the target terms for you. So that is phenomenal. You give it a source segment and you have a term, and you can ask it what is the equivalent target term. Phenomenal. And we do it a slightly different way with ILVS, etc. It's also based on the same technology. But when we run out of steam, we go to GPT-3 and say, okay, we haven't been able to identify the term. Please tell me what it is. And it does it. I can see absolutely, and this is my honest conclusion, translation will be totally automated. These are just so good. And bearing in mind, human translators are not what they're made up to be. I've worked in the localization industry in one form or another since 1990. Translators make horrendous mistakes as well. Human beings, you can always guarantee one thing: we will always foul up occasionally. So
that's a bombshell, Andy. That's a big statement. And
I totally back it up. I've just seen we're using it to spot human translation errors now, and they do. Translators sometimes forget the negative. You're under pressure. The customer is screaming. You're like 1,000 segments behind schedule. And you're rattling through, you see translators just accepting fuzzy matches without correcting them. You must probably seen this, Simon.
Yeah, and I think it's a little bit like, if I could just draw a parallel, it's the same argument to some degree that people have with automated driving. Yes, there are still accidents and mistakes and problems, but when you compare it to the human driving, it is by far, to use a pun, streets ahead. It is a lot less accident prone. There is a big, strong argument, though, from lots of people in the industry, as I'm sure you know well, Andy, about having the human in the loop and that quality assessment at the moment, because we are at the beginning of this AI journey, is pretty critical at this moment in time to make sure that those outputs are good. But yes, humans, whether they're translators or not, unfortunately, we are fallible. So
it's true.
We do make mistakes.
Going back to the driving, which I totally agree with, it's as Henry Ford said, the most unreliable part of a car is the nut behind the wheel. But we are using in beta form AI to check AI, and it's pretty damn good at it.
If you let me add something,
María.
Andy, if you let me add something, I think we are at a point that when using LLMs for translation and localization, there are some ethical considerations that we haven't talked about that need to be taken into account. Right now, I think the human factor is the one that it's helping with. I think, like, for example, cultural sensitivity. Linguists must possess this in-depth cultural sensitivity to ensure that the context of a text meaning is like accurately conveyed. This is especially important in fields such as law and medicine, where mistranslated documents can have serious consequences, or like, I don't know, human expertise. Like, while LLMs can improve efficiency and generate high quality outputs, it is crucial to balance their advantages with human expertise and cultural nuances to ensure accuracy. Or like, I don't know, gender bias. Gender bias could go unnoticed in translated texts, and this could place certain members of the population at risk or disadvantage in certain parts of the world. So I think, like, right now, this human point, this human part of the balance, it is needed still in the LLM translation.
María, can I answer that?
Yeah, for sure.
That's what I thought. Then I looked at the results of GPT-4's tests compared to human beings, and these are to do with SAT tests, etc. One of the tests was empathy tests. This is standard psychological empathy test. We puny humans, on average, score 70% on empathy tests. GPT-4 scored 100%. That means it is more empathetic than the average human. So if you tell it, please, to take into account gender bias in your answers, it will do it better than a human being. That's astounding. It's frightening. It's true. GPT-4 beats humans in most tests, the legal tests, etc. I think there was only one or two where it still hadn't completely, I must dig it out, where it hadn't equaled humans. But you can actually tell it, please translate this, and bear in mind that you need to take gender bias into account. It will do it. This is how good these things are. They are frightening. Forget about the Terminator and all of these kind of robots that have no empathy. These things are capable of more empathy than the average human being.
Is that a human prompt, though, Andy, or is that an AI prompt?
You have to do it. You have to give it the human prompts. Tell it it's okay. No gender bias.
Oh,
translate
okay.
this with no gender bias. Translate this with a positive bias towards XXX. Whether it will do it.
But one thing's for sure, Andy, we're in a whole new world here, and I think
It is
excellent points.
Absolutely. This is. It's difficult to grasp how much of a game changer this is. One of the things that Intento were doing with GPT-3 and GPT-4 is something that I alluded to, and that is changing the gender of the target text. They have an option that you can put it through DeepL or through Microsoft Translator, but then translate it into a neutral or a female voice. Amazing. System, and it does it so fluently with all of grammatically correct. It's brilliant at grammar checking. It's fantastic at spell checking. It's much better than anything you could imagine, any general purpose spell or grammar checking system out there, because it will do it for 175 languages. You tell me what grammar checking or spell checking software can do it for that many languages. And no, Hunspell is pretty useless. So right. it is, it's just.
Well, the capabilities today are one thing, and the capabilities of where we're moving to, I think, is something else. And I do want to pull in maybe some questions, because we're a little over time, but I do want to keep the Q&A open just a little while longer. If people can hang on, great. If not, it will certainly be in the recording. But we've got some key questions, because we've talked about a lot today. We've talked about roles and a bit of optimism. We've talked about the data. We've talked about the AI-powered supply chains. There's an awful lot going on, but we are getting some questions coming in. So if it's okay with the panel, I just want to maybe read a couple out. Maybe I'll kick it off, Maria. I know you've got some questions too, Maria. Maybe I'll come to you next. This is really aimed at you, Andy, but I suppose any of our panel, can you please name some tools that I would need to build my own LLM? Can I leverage my multilingual TM as a source material?
Yes, in two ways. I'm sorry to butt in, but Bruno and Tom, just tell me if you want to answer as well. In order to build an LLM, there are two ways of doing it. There's the easy way, the easy and fast way. That's use embeddings. And the whole thing, if you go to the OpenAI API website, there are multiple videos on YouTube. Absolutely recommend YouTube for this. There are hundreds of really, really good videos on YouTube, how to build a model using embeddings. Okay, you need to know how to program in Python. You don't even need to know how to program well in Python, because one of the things that the GPT family do very well is write code for you. So I'm relatively new to Python. I've only been using it for about a year. I rely on GPT-4 a lot to write some of the more complex functions. I just tell it exactly what I want, and it comes back and it produces really nice code for me. You obviously have to have an IT background and know what you're doing, but it's a great productivity tool. The other way is the hard way, and this requires loads of money and loads of GPUs, graphical processing units, and massive data. But most of these have been pre-processed for you on a website called Hugging Face. That is hugging, as you would hug someone, and then face. So if you go to huggingface. I'm sure it's org.com. Let me just check. Hugging.co. Huggingface.co. If you go there,
anybody with the skills, the aptitude, and the bravery, you can go down that route too.
Yeah. You have to be a software engineer. There's no easy way about it. But here you can leverage an awful lot of stuff that's been already pre-built, and you can play around with it. Having master's in IT or even better, a PhD helps. But if you have the aptitude, then yeah, please go for it. It is expensive to build an LLM from scratch, but embeddings allows you to actually create a tight, small knowledge base that you can utilize, like the one I've done for XTM. The other way of doing it is by tuning an existing model. OpenAI allows you to upload your translation memories and create a tuned model. And with that, you can use that tuned model then for your translation. So effectively, there are like 3 ways of doing it. The embedding one isn't really for translation, it's for knowledge base. The LLMs, yeah, there's fantastic stuff on Hugging Face. And specifically, there are some really good translation automation, machine translation systems out there, but they're patchy. Certain languages have better support than others, but really, you're much better off going to somebody like OpenAI or Anthropic at the moment.
Yeah. Thanks, Andy. I mean, that's a great summary. So I think we've covered that. Maria, I know that we've got a number of questions, so I'm going to jump ahead if that's okay, Andy, because I know we've got quite a number of questions.
Absolutely.
I just want to get to a few of these people that are asking questions. Maria?
Yeah, we got one question for Bruno. Here it is. Sorry, what is the potential future applications of LLMs in the field of translation and localization?
Bruno, do you want to?
Yeah, it's for me.
Yeah.
Well, actually, the scope is quite broad in my perspective because, of course, as I said, there is a whole way of creating what AI is going to be good at, which is actually create data, create actually the language data that is really needed. So that's, I would say, just to generate some content. I think one of the debates I'm quite excited to have in the next months, years, is actually, sometimes you have a choice between using AI to generate content in the target language directly, or to use AI to actually, localize content based on one source. And I think that's that difference between using generative AI to create content directly in the target language or using AI to translate and localize content based on, from one source language. That choice is, I would say both can be justifiable, but it will have an implication in terms of data. Because of course, if you want to use generative AI to create content in French, German, all languages, you need to have, of course, again, the right data sets, clean, accurate, in the language directly. And you cannot just say, oh, I'm going to use something in French, specifically in regulated industries. You cannot just say, oh yeah, it's going to be good enough, or it's going to be slightly post-edited. It's going to be really the effort, in my perspective, the effort will be huge in the beginning, upstream, as Simon said, which is to have the right data sets to use either as generative AI or as what I call multilingual AI, which is to use AI to translate and localize content faster and better. So content, I would say the scope in localization will be the creation or the localization as we know it.
Thank you, Bruno. Quick question here. Tom, maybe if I can direct this one to you initially. It's about, I think it's a comment that we were talking about earlier about empathy. Maria was raising that question of empathy, and Andy was giving a few thoughts on his experience of that. But the question is about the human side of AI. Do you think that empathy requires some degree of consciousness, or do we stay with the good old, well, if you can't tell the difference, who cares?
I mean, we're in scary territory. Andy was talking about, AI scoring higher. empathy tests than humans. And there's certainly, I've been able to produce stuff that's strikingly effective in terms of its ability to empathize with a target audience as much as a human writer or strategist would. And so you can look at what's being generated by the AI based on what it's trained on in terms of its effectiveness. In terms of its degree of empathy, I mean, a lot of it can be quite subjective if you're looking at it as a human and you're trying to QA that. So there's some risks in relying purely on the AI to demonstrate an ability to have empathy and produce stuff based on that. There's risks relying on humans exclusively because they make way more mistakes. But there's also risks on having human steps of QA in the process of using AI, whether that's exploring data or generating content or whatever else. And I think it's really important to have a well vetted, well tested, and agreed upon QA process of human involvement to understand what somebody needs to be looking for, and how they can spot risks and how they can identify something before it spirals out of control. They kind of they can spot things early. So that human role is certainly important. It always, I think, will be, and perhaps it will change over time. But it's also, you can't just shove a human in and expect to overcome that issue. That model is still ripe with issues and needs careful implementation.
Thanks, Tom. Well, look, we're a little bit over time, so apologies to people who are joining us here live. I just want to give the floor to the panel just for any final quick thoughts. So maybe Bruno, could I start with you? Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would say that AI in general, and certainly for the language industry, is going to be full of challenges, but at the same time, it's going to be full of opportunities. So I think every time you see a challenge in AI in the language industry, you see at the same time at least one opportunity, and potentially more than one opportunity. So that, I think that's important. The second point is that I believe that humans are still valuable, in the next decades in the language industry for the reasons I mentioned. And I would add something that we talked a lot about, large language models, but I think there is a huge business opportunity also in the custom language models, which are going to be really important in regulated industries, finance, legal, life science. And in those industries, believe me, you can see that already now, based on what happened years ago with machine translation. Humans have to be part of the supply chains. Don't expect any pharmaceutical company to have an SOP where it's going to be mentioned, it's going to be all AI translated. It's not going to happen, probably not in my lifetime. And so just to say that in some industries, the evolution will be a bit slower, but it will be also more I would say, more limited in terms of use of AI, just because there is this vital, effectiveness of content, like in medical device, for instance, that you cannot just say, or that companies will not just let AI just responsible for. So that's my point.
Thanks, Bruno. Yeah, and that the roles are changing and the AI-powered content supply chains are changing. Andy, any last thoughts as we wrap up our discussion?
Yes, I think Bruno is actually reducing his lifespan dramatically. If he says not in his lifetime. Joking apart, if you really want to know the state of LLM sentience, like for what it's worth, I recommend going onto YouTube and just looking up Lambda, Lambda, and then is sentient. I've posted the link to the video in one of the question boards. I challenge you in this, I think, what is it's 25-minute, no, 34-minute, I think, conversation that a Google researcher is having with Lambda, I challenge you to tell me Lambda isn't sentient. I know people will say, okay, it's just smoke and mirrors, etc. But it does a bloody good job of convincing you that it is.
That was the question to Tom. Does it matter if the human can't tell the difference? But look, it's
Yeah,
great
yeah.
to have a different opinion here. And there's two sides to the argument. I think that Lambda video that you're talking to, like, that's more than a year old at this stage.
Yeah,
And that,
yeah.
like, we're way past that already. So
Yep.
it is a fascinating topic. But thank you, Andy. Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Yep.
Maria, do you want to jump in? Any thoughts from you as we wrap up?
Sure. I just think that large language models have emerged as a powerful tool in the language service industry that can augment or even challenge traditional machine translation systems. They have the potential to generate translations without relying on parallel corpora, making them more versatile and flexible, particularly in scenarios that we have a lack of sufficient data for a specific language. And this is, I don't want to say scary, I want to say exciting. This brings us to a new future. And I think that's always great. I mean, we don't know what's coming next, but it's going to be amazing.
It certainly is going to be an exciting future. And Tom, bring us home. Any last thoughts?
I mean, the guys have alluded to this a lot already, and Bruno's presentation talked about the supply chain of data, and I think it's the same risk you can make with data just purely operating as a human. If you don't have enough information, you don't have the right breadth of information, you have such a risk of bias, of making the wrong choice, making poor decisions. The machines will do that as well. So there's going to be a huge emphasis on the quality, the curation, organization of data, as well as the value of data as a whole. I mean, companies are going to be mining much harder for data as they manage to extract far more value than they previously were able to, as these models develop, as they get used even more. So I imagine that's going to have impacts on things like privacy and the value of data being sold and all that stuff. So interesting and possibly worrying direction for us to be heading in, but probably an inevitable one as these models develop.
Thank you, Tom. I just want to say thank you to everybody who's managed to join us live here today. We did go a little bit over time, but it's such a hot topic. We could talk for hours and days on this alone. I want to say thank you to Maria Roa for her help and assistance in putting on this series of AI and content and localization and everything in between. Thank you, of course, to the guests joining us today, to Tom, to Bruno, and to Andy, and also to Daniela and Emily behind the scenes who are helping us make all this possible. So thank you, everybody. It's been a real pleasure. Make sure you visit thinkglobalforum.org, and register for part 3 coming real soon. Thank you, everybody. It's been a pleasure.